bell before we begin. If you're new here, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. Now drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? Globe showing Europe, Africa. Let's see how far this story reaches. I'll be reading every single one. Backhand index pointing down. She should not have been there. The moonlit choosing was sacred, reserved only for the willing, only for the wolf-blooded, only for those the pack deemed worthy of standing in the circle. And she was nothing more than a servant girl crouched in the dark between the trees, her copper curls shoved beneath a hood. Her heart beat so loud she was certain it would give her away. But that night, as the Alpha King moved slowly through the firelit clearing, guided by something older and deeper than thought, something unexpected happened. He stopped. His massive chest rose on one long, deliberate breath. His head turned, not toward the women standing in the ritual circle, not toward the elders, not toward the drums or the fire or the ancient ceremony unfolding around him, toward the darkness, toward the trees, toward her. His eyes found hers, and for one suspended, terrible second, the whole world stopped. The next instant she was already running. What Ellis Ridge had not expected, what no one in 300 years of moonlit choosings had ever expected, was that the Alpha King himself would abandon the ritual entirely and come after her. That he would push past his own ceremonial guards. That the great pale wolf of the Klin bloodline, unseen in public for 7 years, would appear in the firelight in front of every elder, every witness, every stunned member of the pack, and vanish into the trees. Why would the most powerful alpha in the kingdom chase a girl with no name and no blood and nothing to her name but a crimson hood and a lost bet? What was it about her, a servant, a nobody, a woman who had spent her entire life learning to take up less space, that made an alpha's instinct halt an ancient ritual before the entire pack? As she runs between the trees, one question hammers through her chest with every footfall. Why is the Alpha King hunting me? And the answer she won't find until it is too late to run from, will change the fate of everything. The moon was directly overhead, enormous and cold. When Ellis Ridge understood, she had made the worst mistake of her life. She was pressed against the trunk of an oak at the tree line's edge, no more than 20 yards from the sacred clearing, and her heart was beating so hard and so loud that she genuinely believed it might be what gave her away. Not her breathing, not her shadow. Her heart, hammering against her ribs like something trying to escape through the front of her chest. The heat from the bonfires reached her in uneven pulses, warm, then cold, then warm again, and the sound of the drums was like nothing she had ever heard inside Lady Vorn's fortress. It was not music. It was older than music. It rose and fell like a living thing breathing, like the forest itself had a pulse and the drums were only finding it and following. Why did I come here? She knew why. She had known since she woke that morning and remembered what the night would require of her. She had known and done it anyway, which was the particular brand of stupidity she reserved for situations she had already decided were impossible to survive with dignity. It had started 2 nights before, in the small room she shared with Sarah and Nara on the lower level of the fortress, when the candle was burning low and the wine was gone and sleep was refusing to come for any of them. Sarah had started it the way Sarah always started things, in the voice she used when she already knew she was about to say something that would cause problems and had decided to say it regardless. Have you ever heard what actually happens at the moonlit choosing? Nara had looked up from her knees. Ellis had kept her eyes on the ceiling and said nothing, which Sarah had correctly interpreted as permission to continue. Once a year, Sarah said, pulling her blanket around her shoulders with the gravity of someone delivering classified information. First full moon of spring. The whole pack gathers in a clearing deep in the forest. Bonfires at the 4 corners, drums going all night, the elders in a ring around the outside. Pause for effect. Sarah had always understood the value of a pause. And in the center of the circle, the Alpha King enters. For what? Ellis had asked, even though something in Sarah's voice told her the question was already a trap.
Sarah smiled.
To choose. The silence that followed was absolutely deliberate. They say, Sarah continued, slower now lower. That on the night of the moonlit choosing, the wolf takes over completely, that the moon does something to them, wakes something up that the human form keeps locked away the rest of the year. Something ancient, something that doesn't think in words. She pulled her knees to her chest. And then the alpha walks among the women who volunteered to stand in the circle, and he scents the air and the wolf chooses. Not the man, the wolf. And the women agree to this? Ellis said. For many, it's an honor, Nara said quietly from her corner. She had been listening with her eyes down, in the way she listened when something was making her careful. Their families received the pack's favor, protection, prosperity. She paused. For others, it's something else. The hope of being seen by fate. My grandmother says, Nara added even more quietly, that it is strictly forbidden to watch. Only those standing in the circle are permitted in the clearing. The punishment for trespassing the sacred ground is... She stopped. Is what? Sarah asked. Severe, Nara said, and did not elaborate. That was when Sarah had proposed the competition. A water-carrying race from the well before the dinner bell. Whoever carried the fewest buckets would face the forfeit. The forfeit being: slip into the forest on the night of the moonlit choosing, find the clearing, watch, and come back to describe everything. Ellis had accepted with the careless confidence of someone certain she was going to win. She had not won. And now here she was, 20 yards from a sacred ceremony she had no right to witness, her copper hair shoved under a hood, her heart announcing her presence to anyone within a 50-yard radius, watching the Alpha King of Valkrath move through the firelit circle with the slow, absolute certainty of something that had never once in its life needed to hurry. Josh Klin was not what the rumors had prepared her for. The rumors said, tall, dark-bearded, broad through the shoulders, built like the mountains his kingdom was carved from. The rumors were not wrong. They were simply insufficient. They were the outline without the weight, the description without the gravity, the difference between being told a storm is coming and standing outside when it arrives. He moved through the ceremony bare-chested in the firelight, leather-clad from the waist down, leather bracers on his forearms, the dark beard framing a face that was not handsome in any comfortable sense of the word but was compelling in the way that cliffs are compelling. Something you could not look at and then look away from easily. Every step he took was measured, deliberate, the unhurried stride of a man who had never needed to rush because nothing in the world would dare move before he permitted it. The drums beat 3 times, louder. Ellis pressed herself harder against the oak and told herself to leave. Her feet did not obey. And then Josh Klin stopped walking. It was not gradual. It was not a slowing, a hesitation, a moment of distraction. It was abrupt, as though something invisible had seized him mid-step and held. His entire body went still. His spine straightened. His massive shoulders rose on one long, slow inhale, his head tilting to one side with the particular, terrible precision of an animal that has just caught a scent it does not yet have a name for but already, completely recognizes. He cannot see me, Ellis thought. I am hidden. There is no way. And then he turned his head, slowly, with the calm certainty of someone who already knows exactly where to look. His eyes found hers through the distance and the darkness and the 20 yards of night between them, and they did not search. They arrived. Direct and absolute, the way you find something you have been missing and have finally stopped pretending you weren't looking for. Ellis stopped breathing. Across the clearing, the drums faltered. She ran. Bell, we're only at the beginning and I can already feel this one. Drop a comment and tell me. Are you already Team Ellis or did Josh Klin just ruin you? Loudly crying face fire if you haven't subscribed yet. Do it now so you get every chapter the moment it drops. Backhand index pointing down. The room they shared was the kind that encouraged honesty. Too small for pretense, too cold for comfort, lit by a single candle that was losing its argument with the dark. 3 narrow cots, 3 worn blankets, a trunk at the foot of each bed that held everything any of them owned, which was not much. The stone walls had never been warm. After 7 years, Ellis had stopped expecting them to be. Sarah was sitting cross-legged on her cot with her blanket pulled around her shoulders like a cape, wearing the expression she always wore just before she said something that would cause problems. Nara had her knees hugged to her chest in the corner, her dark eyes moving between them with the careful attention of someone who reads a room before she reads anything else. The wine was gone. Sleep was nowhere. Outside, the forest beyond the fortress walls was doing something it only did on this particular night of the year, breathing differently, as though the dark itself had shifted into a lower register. Sarah let the silence build for exactly as long as it needed to. "Have you ever heard," she said, "what actually happens at the Moonlit choosing?" Nara looked up. Ellis kept her eyes on the ceiling and said nothing, which Sarah had long ago learned to interpret as permission. The ritual happened once a year, Sarah explained, on the first full moon of spring, when the entire pack gathered in a clearing deep in the forest. Bonfires at the four corners, drums beating from dusk until the choosing was done. The elders arranged in a ring around the outside like sentinels at a border no one crossed. And in the center of the circle, the Alpha King entered alone. "His wolf," Sarah said, lowering her voice the way people lower their voices in rooms with thin walls, took over completely. The moon did something to them on that night, woke something ancient that the human form kept locked away the rest of the year. Something that didn't think in words or concern itself with politics or protocol or the feelings of anyone who happened to be standing in the way. The Alpha walked among the women who had volunteered to stand in the circle, and his wolf scented the air, and it chose. "And the women agree to this?" Ellis said. "For many it's an honor," Nara said quietly. "Their families receive the pack's favor. Protection." She paused. "My grandmother says it's also strictly forbidden to watch. The punishment for trespassing the sacred ground is—" She stopped. "Is what?" Sarah asked. Nara looked at her hands. "Severe." This was the point at which a reasonable person would have let the subject die and gone to sleep. Sarah was not, had never been, and showed no signs of becoming a reasonable person. She proposed a competition, a water-carrying race from the well before the dinner bell the following afternoon, the number of buckets tallied, the loser to face the forfeit. The forfeit being, on the night of the Moonlit choosing, slip into the forest, find the clearing, watch, and come back to describe everything. Ellis accepted with the careless confidence of someone certain she was going to win. She did not win. It was not close. And so, the following night, she found herself at the tree line's edge with her copper hair shoved under her deepest crimson hood, her heart attempting to leave her chest through her sternum, the bonfires throwing orange light across the clearing in long, uneven waves. The drums were nothing like she had expected. They were not music. They were something older than music. A pulse, a pressure, a sound that lived in the bones rather than the ears and made the air between the trees feel dense with something she had no name for. She should have looked for 10 seconds and left. That had been the plan. 10 seconds, enough to describe something truthful, and then back to the fortress before anyone noticed she was gone. Josh Klin was not what the rumors had built. He was bare-chested in the firelight, leather from the waist down, bracers on his forearms, a dark beard that framed his face like something deliberately carved. He was enormous, not merely tall but constructed, the kind of physical presence that rearranged the space around it simply by existing inside it, and he moved through the ceremony with a slowness so deliberate it had its own weight, the unhurried stride of something that had never once in its life needed to hurry because the world had always arranged itself around his timing and not the reverse. She could not look away. She told herself to. Her feet stayed exactly where they were. The drums struck 3 times. Louder. She pressed herself against the oak at her back and stopped breathing. He stopped walking. His head turned with a precision that had nothing accidental in it. Slow, certain, aimed. His eyes crossed the distance and the darkness between them as though neither existed and found hers with the directness of something that had not been searching, but arriving. She ran. The forest took her immediately. Branches, roots, the ground uneven and invisible beneath the dark. The slope opened without warning. A drop she had no time to register before her body was already committed to it. And she went down hard and fast and badly, catching nothing, the wet earth and slick moss offering no resistance and no mercy. She hit the oak at the bottom with her full weight and lay on the cold ground with no air in her lungs and no idea which direction led home. She did not make it back to the fortress for 2 days. She came back on the second afternoon, slipping in through the kitchen entrance with mud dried to her knees and a tear along the left shoulder of her dress that she had no good explanation for. Her rib announced itself with every step. Not broken, she had decided, but bruised deeply enough to make breathing feel like a negotiation. She had spent 2 nights on the forest floor with her hood pulled over her face and her back against the same oak that had stopped her fall, waiting for her legs to agree to carry her, eating nothing, drinking from a stream she found by sound alone in the dark. She told Sarah and Nara she had tripped on a root and gotten turned around in the dark. She said this with the flat, uninflected delivery of someone recounting something boring, which she had learned long ago was more convincing than any elaborate story. She said her rib hurt and she needed to sleep and she would appreciate it if neither of them asked her anything else tonight. Nara brought her bread from the kitchen without being asked. Sarah looked at the tear in her dress and the mud on her knees and the careful way she was holding her left side and said nothing, which was so unlike Sarah that it was almost more alarming than if she had said everything. It was not until Ellis had eaten half the bread and was sitting on the edge of her cot, trying to work up the will to remove her ruined shoes, that Nara spoke. "People are talking," she said, quietly, in the way Nara said things she wasn't sure should be said at all. "About what happened at the Moonlit choosing." Ellis kept her eyes on her shoes. "People always talk. Not like this." Nara pulled her knees to her chest, her dark eyes careful and precise. "My grandmother was there. She said she had never, in 40 years of choosings, seen anything like it." Sarah leaned forward from her own cot. The expression on her face had abandoned all pretense of disinterest. The Alpha King had stopped mid-ritual. Not slowed, not hesitated, stopped, completely in the center of the circle, while the drums were still going and the chosen women were still standing and the elders were still watching. He had turned toward the tree line. And then he had tried to leave. The ceremonial guards had closed in front of him. 4 of them, the finest warriors in the pack, men chosen specifically to protect the integrity of the choosing, and he had tried to walk through them. When they held their position, he had growled. Not raised his voice. Growled, from somewhere below the human register, a sound that had made every person within range step back without deciding to. The guards had not stepped back. The law was the law. The ritual was the ritual. He had tried a second time. 2 of them had physically taken hold of his arms, and what it had cost them to hold him was apparently visible from the outer ring of the circle. And then, in front of the entire pack, every elder, every witness, 300 years of unbroken tradition. Josh Klin had surrendered the internal battle he was clearly losing, and the great pale wolf of the Klin bloodline had appeared for the first time in public in 7 years. It had shaken free of the guards before anyone could react, cleared the circle in 2 strides, and disappeared into the forest. It had not returned until nearly dawn. The clearing had been completely silent for a long time after. "My grandmother says," Nara finished very carefully, "that he sensed someone outside the circle, someone who wasn't supposed to be there." A pause. Her eyes moved to Ellis with the gentleness of someone who already suspects an answer and is asking anyway because she needs to hear it said. "Could it have been you?" The room went very quiet. Then Sarah laughed. Sudden, sharp, the laugh of someone releasing a breath they'd been holding without realizing it. "Ellis!" The idea was clearly too large for the room, too absurd to fit inside the logic of their small shared life, and the laughter was a relief precisely because of that. She went to look at the ritual, and the Alpha King abandoned 300 years of tradition for her. She tripped on a root. Nara smiled, small and uncertain. The question retreated. Ellis said nothing. Not yes, not no. She leaned forward and blew out the candle, and the room dropped into dark, and she lay down on her cot with the mud still cracked on her knees and her rib aching on every exhale and her eyes fixed on the ceiling she could no longer see. She was asleep before she expected to be. The dream came quietly, not the ritual, not the fire or the drums or the cold ground of the forest floor. Only the clearing, empty and dark, and him standing at the edge of it, that vast, unhurried stillness, the dark beard, the eyes that had found her across every yard of impossible distance as though there had been no distance at all. He wasn't moving toward her. He was simply there, already certain, the way he had been certain in the forest, looking at her as though he had always known exactly where she was. She did not run in the dream. She stayed. And the looking continued, slow and complete and weightless, and somewhere in the middle of it, before she could think of a reason to be afraid, it stopped feeling like being seen and started feeling like being known. She woke once in the night, her heart unsteady, the room dark and quiet around her. She closed her eyes and went back. The news came down through the fortress the way all news did, starting at the top and arriving at the kitchen last, filtered through 4 layers of retelling until it landed in front of Ellis in the form of the head cook's daughter appearing in the doorway with the particular expression of someone carrying information they consider important. Alpha King Josh Klin of Valkrath was arriving. Today. Within the hour. Officially, to confirm the alliance and the terms of the marriage agreement between his house and Lady Vorn's. Rooms were to be prepared. The good linens. The silver that only came out twice a year. Every servant who could be pulled from their regular duties was to be pulled. Ellis registered this the way she registered most things that had nothing to do with her, at the surface without letting it settle. She was assigned to the courtyard, scrubbing stone. She took her bucket and her brush and went. The courtyard in late morning was all gray light and cold air, the cobblestones still damp from the previous night's rain. The kind of work that asked nothing of your mind and everything of your knees. Ellis found a rhythm in it the way she always did. Back and forth. The brush against stone. The small, portable piece of a task that had a beginning and an end and required no decisions beyond where to move the bucket next. She was not thinking about him. She had been extremely deliberate about not thinking about him for 3 days, and she had been largely successful if she didn't count the dreams, which she had decided not to count. She heard the gates before she saw them move. The heavy creak of the iron hinges, the sound of hooves on the road outside, the guard's voice carrying across the yard with the particular projection reserved for arrivals that mattered. The words reached her clearly. Alpha King Josh Klin of Valkrath. She did not look up. There was no reason to look up. It had nothing to do with her. She moved the bucket 6 inches to the left and kept scrubbing. Her head turned on its own. It was not a decision. It was the body doing what the body does before the mind has any say in the matter, the involuntary rotation toward a sound, a presence, a weight in the air that registered below the level of conscious thought. Her eyes lifted from the wet stone and crossed the courtyard toward the gate. He was already looking at her. Not at Lady Vorn on the staircase. Not at the fortress walls or the yard or the assembled servants lining the approach. Her. Directly, immediately, without a moment of adjustment or searching, the way you look at something you have been trying to find and have finally, after longer than you wanted, found. His eyes came to her the way they had come to her across the dark of the forest, with that same unsettling, unhurried certainty that had no business existing between a king and a woman on her knees scrubbing his host's courtyard floor. Ellis's hand stopped moving. The brush was still in her grip. The bucket was still beside her knee. The cobblestones were still wet and the morning was still cold and none of the physical facts of the world had changed in any way she could identify. And yet everything felt suddenly, completely different in a manner she had no framework for and no interest in examining. She dropped the brush, clattered against the stone. Dirty water rocked in the bucket. In the courtyard's momentary quiet the sound was larger than it should have been, and she felt her face go hot in a way she despised and could not stop. She reached for the brush immediately, automatically, kept her eyes down with the focused attention of someone performing normalcy under direct observation. From the staircase, Lady Vorn's voice descended. Practiced, warm, precisely calibrated. Your Majesty, what an honor to receive you at Vorn. The welcome of a woman who had been preparing this moment for weeks and intended every syllable of it to land correctly. A beat of silence. Then his voice, low, carrying easily across the yard without effort. The deep, unhurried register she remembered from the clearing, even though he had not spoken in the clearing, had only breathed and turned and looked. Lady Vorn, the honor is mine. She heard him begin to climb the stairs. She did not look up. She was scrubbing stone. That was what she was doing. That was the only thing happening. Then his voice came again. Quieter this time, no longer aimed at the staircase or the yard or anyone who might be listening. Aimed with the same precision as his eyes, across the cobblestones, directly at her and no one else. There you are. 2 words. Certain and low and carrying in them something that was not a greeting but a conclusion. The sound of someone finishing a thought they had been holding for 3 days. She heard him disappear through the fortress doors. Heard the sound of the gathering resume around her. Conversation and movement filling the space his arrival had briefly compressed into silence. Ellis picked up her brush, put it back in the bucket, moved it in slow, even strokes across the stone. Her hands were shaking. She scrubbed the same section of courtyard floor for 40 minutes without noticing. That night, she fell asleep faster than she expected, and he was already there when she arrived. Standing in the middle of the dream the way he had stood in the courtyard, unhurried, as though he had been there long enough to get comfortable waiting. This time he spoke. "I've been looking for you," he said. Simply, without apology, the way he seemed to say everything. In the dream, unlike every waking moment of the past 3 days, Ellis did not look away. The great hall was the most beautiful room in Lady Vorn's fortress, and on nights like this it knew it. The chandeliers held 200 candles between them and threw light that was golden and unstable across the dark oak table and the stone walls and the faces of the guests arranged along its length. Light that made everything look warmer than it was, more generous than it was, more honest than it was. It was, Ellis had always thought, the perfect room for a conversation where no one intended to say anything true. She took her position at the sideboard with the wine pitcher in both hands and made herself into furniture. This was a skill she had spent years refining. Eyes down, shoulders back but not stiff, movement between chairs slow and smooth and unremarkable. The goal was to be the hand that filled the glass, not the person attached to it. She was very good at this. She had never had reason to be anything else. Josh Klin entered last. The conversation did not stop when he came in. It was too practiced a gathering for that, but it softened, adjusted, rearranged itself around his presence the way water rearranges around something dropped into it. He crossed the room without hurrying, exchanged a quiet word with one of his own men, and settled into the chair at Lady Vorn's right with the ease of someone who had occupied rooms like this his entire life and found nothing in them worth being impressed by. Lady Vorn received him with a smile that was warm and precise in equal measure. He returned it with a courtesy that was perfectly calibrated and revealed nothing. Before he sat, his eyes moved once across the hall. They stopped on the sideboard, on her. Then he looked away and the dinner began, and Ellis told herself it had been a general survey of the room and meant exactly nothing. The conversation at the table had the structure of a game where all players understood the rules and none of them would acknowledge the game was being played. Lady Vorn steered it with the lightness of someone who had spent 30 years making control look like ease. The weather, the mountain roads, the autumn harvest, each subject a stepping stone toward something else. When she arrived at the ritual, she did it gracefully, almost apologetically, as though the topic had simply wandered into the conversation on its own. "I heard, Your Majesty, that the Moonlit choosing was eventful this year." A small smile, curious, not pointed, perfectly done. The silence that followed was brief and had considerable weight. "The Pax rituals," Josh said, without adjusting his tone by a single degree, "are not a subject for the dinner table." He lifted his glass and drank, and the matter was concluded. The table shifted almost imperceptibly. a straightening of spines, a recalibration of the air, and Lady Vorn inclined her head and moved the conversation elsewhere, and if the redirection cost her anything it did not show on her face. Ellis began her first circuit. She moved left to right along the table, filling glass after glass, sliding between chairs with the practiced silence of someone who had done this so many times that her body knew the angles without being asked. She did not look at the guests. The guests did not look at her. This was the arrangement, and it had always suited her perfectly. When she reached his chair, she was ready. She had been ready since the second circuit of the sideboard, had composed herself through the simple discipline of focusing on the picture, the angle, the glass, the clean mechanics of a task that asked nothing of her except precision. His hand was resting on the table beside the goblet. Relaxed, open, fingers spread across the dark wood with the ease of someone who had never held tension in his hands in his life. She tipped the pitcher. The wine came down in a thin, dark stream. He moved his hand. Not much. An inch, perhaps less. A small, unhurried adjustment, the kind of movement that could have been anything, could have meant nothing. But now his fingers were closer. Close enough that the heat of his skin reached her before any contact did. A warmth that had no business being as present as it was across that small, unbridged distance. She did not spill. She did not look at him. She completed the pour with steady hands and a heart rate she was privately furious about, straightened the pitcher, and moved to the next chair. Across the table, one of Lady Vorn's ladies bent toward the woman beside her and said something behind her hand. Lady Vorn did not turn her head, but something shifted behind her eyes. A small, precise alteration, there and gone, like a door opening and closing too quickly to see what was behind it. Ellis made for circuits. 3 times she felt his attention find her before she was close enough to look up and confirm it. A warmth at the edge of her awareness, directional and specific, nothing like the ambient attention of a crowded room. She did not look up to confirm it. She was serving wine. That was all. On the 4th circuit, Lady Vorn caught her eye and made a small gesture with 2 fingers. Dismissal, elegant and absolute. Ellis set the pitcher on the sideboard and left the hall without looking back. She lay awake for a long time. The candle had burned out and the room was very dark, and she stared at the place where the ceiling was and replayed, despite every instruction she gave herself not to, the heat of his hand that had never quite touched hers, the distance that had felt, for one suspended moment, like the smallest distance in the world. She hated how real it had felt. She hated more that it still did. The walls had been closing in since dinner. It was not a new feeling. The fortress had always had a particular talent for compression, for making the air in the lower quarters feel used and borrowed, as though everyone had already breathed it before it reached her. On the worst nights Ellis had learned, over 7 years, that the only solution was the northern ramparts. Far enough from the guard rotation to be reliably empty, high enough that the air was different, sharper, cleaner, belonging to no one. She had been going there since her 2nd winter in the fortress, when she was 9 years old and had first discovered that altitude made problems feel a more manageable size. She pulled her shawl around her shoulders, slipped out of the servants' quarters without waking Sarah or Nara, and climbed. The stairwell was dark and narrow and cold in the specific way of stone that has never once in its existence been warm. She counted the steps without meaning to. She always did, 37, the number as familiar as her own name, and pushed through the door at the top into the night air. Josh Klin was leaning against the far parapet with his arms crossed and his eyes on the treeline below, and he did not look surprised to see her. He looked like someone who had been waiting and was done performing patience about it. Ellis stopped. The door was still in her hand. "I wondered how long it would take," he said. She found her voice somewhere behind her sternum. "I come here all the time." "I know." He said it simply, without emphasis. "I asked." He turned to face her then, fully, and in the open moonlight without the mediation of firelight or candlelight or the social geometry of a dinner table, the full physical fact of him was significant. She had known he was large. She had been aware of his size in the courtyard, in the hall, in every space she had occupied at the same time as him. But on the ramparts, with nothing between them and the cold open sky, the massive frame and the dark beard and the complete, unhurried self-possession hit her differently. Like a wall, almost. Like something that had simply always been there. She took a step back without deciding to. He did not advance. He stayed exactly where he was against the parapet and looked at her with those dark, direct eyes and began to speak. He did not dress it in performance or approach it from an angle or attempt to soften the shape of it before handing it to her. He told her plainly. His wolf had chosen her at the moonlit choosing. Not the women in the circle. She understood that distinction, he said, watching her face as he said it, making sure it landed. Not any of the women who had volunteered and stood in the firelight and understood the ritual they were participating in. Her. A servant hiding in the trees who had come because she lost a bet. His wolf had found her scent across the clearing and had known, with the total, wordless certainty that wolves knew things, that nothing else in the ceremony mattered after that. He had come to Lady Vorn's fortress to break the marriage agreement, not to confirm it. He was not here for the alliance or the politics or the careful diplomatic maintenance of two kingdoms' goodwill. He was here because his wolf had not stopped searching since the night in the forest, and he had run out of reasons to pretend that was a problem he could simply wait out. He said all of this looking directly at her, without apology and without flinching, and then he stopped and waited. Ellis had several responses. She deployed all of them. She was only a servant. He was mistaken. She was not a wolf, had no wolf blood, had nothing in her that could account for what he was describing. The women in the circle were the chosen ones, willing, blooded, appropriate in every way she was not. He was mistaken, she said again, because it seemed important to say it twice. Whatever he had sensed in the forest had nothing to do with her. She was the wrong person. He needed to go back inside and sleep, and in the morning the sense of this would be clearer to him. He listened to all of it. He did not interrupt. When she finished he was quiet for a moment, and then he pushed off from the parapet and took one slow step toward her. I am not mistaken, he said. My wolf does not make mistakes about this. His hand found her waist, one firm, warm beat of contact, and something went through her that she had no name for and no interest in examining and no ability whatsoever to ignore. She pulled free and turned and walked fast toward the stairwell door. Not running. Telling herself she was not running. His voice came after her, low and entirely certain. The voice of someone making a simple observation about a thing that had already been decided. You are not going to run from me forever, Ellis Ridge. She went through the door and down the 37 steps and did not stop until she reached the bottom. Neither of them saw the shadow that had been standing in the stairwell. Neither of them heard it retreat. Neither of them knew that by the time the fortress had gone fully quiet and even the kitchen fire had burned to embers, Lady Vorn was sitting in her chair by the window with a glass of wine she was not drinking, listening to a full account of every word that had been said on the northern ramparts. Her eyes fixed on the candle flame with an expression that was not anger. It was something colder than anger, and considerably more deliberate. Belle, we are halfway through this story and I need to know. Are you Team Ellis, or did Josh Klinn just become your favorite fictional alpha? Drop a comment and tell me what scene hit you hardest so far. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe now. That's how you can support the channel. Hit that button so you never miss an upload. Backhand index pointing down fire. The candle came first. A thin slice of light appeared beneath the door. There, then widening as the door opened, and Lady Vorn came through it without knocking in a dark silk robe with her hair pinned and her face arranged into the expression she wore when she was doing something she considered beneath her and intended to complete quickly. She carried the candle at shoulder height. The flame did not waver. Neither did she. Sarah sat up sharply, the way people do when they are pulled from sleep by something that registers as wrong before the mind has identified what wrong means. Nara went completely still in her corner. The particular stillness of someone whose instinct in the presence of danger is not to move at all. Lady Vorn's eyes moved across the room. They found Ellis and stopped. The silence lasted long enough to make its own point. Then Lady Vorn stepped inside, one measured pace, just enough for the door to fall closed behind her. And when she spoke, her voice was so quiet it was almost gentle. Almost. She was an orphan, Lady Vorn began. Ellis Ridge. An orphan with no family name worth speaking and no blood worth tracing, who had arrived at this fortress at 7 years old with no explanation beyond that her parents were gone, and there was no one left and the castle needed floors scrubbed. She had been given a cot and a function, and both had been more than she was owed. Lady Vorn said this without cruelty in her tone. She said it the way one states the dimensions of a room as simple, established fact. No one would ask where she was, Lady Vorn continued, if she were simply no longer here. No inquiry would be made. No search conducted. There was no one positioned to miss her in any way that produced consequence. She paused, letting that settle. He had not seen her. Whatever Ellis had imagined on the ramparts, whatever she had allowed herself to construct in the private space of her own foolish chest over the past 4 days, it was imagination and nothing more. Men like Josh Klin did not see women like her. They looked past them, through them, the way you looked past furniture, registering its presence only when it needed moving. She was the ground he walked on. She was the stone beneath his boot that he did not notice and would not notice, and if she had interpreted a king's idle glance as something it was not, that was a confusion she needed to correct before it cost her more than it already had. Each sentence arrived in exactly the right place. Lady Vorn had 30 years of practice, 30 years of learning where the gaps were in people, where the unhealed things lived, which words fit which wounds. She did not raise her voice once. She did not need to. The near whisper was more precise than shouting, and she knew it. The threat, when it came, was clean and brief. Leave before sunrise. Take whatever fit in her hands and go. That was the first option. Lady Vorn let the alternative go unspoken for a moment, which was more effective than speaking it, and then said that if Ellis was still inside the fortress walls when the sun came up, she would not be leaving through the gate. She turned her eyes to Sarah and Nara. Both of them were pale, both very still, both wearing the expression of people witnessing something they understood they were not meant to survive with dignity if they reacted wrongly. Lady Vorn regarded them for a moment with the mild attention of someone checking a list. The dungeon has been empty for some time, she said. It would be a shame to waste it. The room was silent. I'll get my things, Ellis said. Lady Vorn looked at her for one moment longer, evaluating, confirming, satisfied with what she found, and then turned and left, pulling the door behind her, taking the candle with her. The darkness that dropped into the room in her wake was absolute. No one spoke. Ellis sat on the edge of her cot and reached beneath it for the bundle she kept there. The few things that were genuinely hers, which did not take long to gather because there were not many of them. Her hands were steady. She was aware of this with a distant, clinical detachment, the way you notice small things when the large things were too large to look at directly. Nara crossed the room in the dark. She found Ellis by feel and hugged her. Fiercely, with both arms, with a force entirely disproportionate to her size and entirely proportionate to what she was trying to hold together. Ellis felt the shaking in her and understood it was not fear. You did nothing wrong, Nara whispered. Ellis stood still inside the embrace for one moment. One full breath. She allowed herself that much. Then she gently, carefully pulled away, because if she stayed another second inside that warmth, something would crack open that she could not afford to have cracked open right now, and she needed to walk a long road in the dark, and she needed to be able to do it. She picked up her bundle. She put on her shoes. She walked to the door. She did not look back. She had learned this a long time ago. That looking back was the thing that made leaving impossible, and she had been leaving things her entire life, and she knew how it was done. The road outside the fortress gate was dark and long and cold, the dirt already damp with the beginning of morning, the trees on either side pressing close. She walked into it with her bundle against her chest and Lady Vorn's words arranged in a row inside her head, and she tried, as she walked, to make them feel true. They didn't fit right. They were the right shape, the right size, words she had heard in various forms for years and had always known how to wear. But tonight, for the first time, they felt borrowed. Like something that belonged to a version of herself she was no longer entirely certain she was. She kept walking anyway. The fortress disappeared behind her. The dark did not. The road gave her nothing to look at but the dark, which was fine. She did not want anything to look at. She wanted to walk and breathe and let the movement settle something in her chest that was refusing, stubbornly and inconveniently, to settle on its own. She recited Lady Vaughan's words as she went. Not because she wanted to, because she needed them to land properly, to find the places inside her where they fit, to do what they had always done before, which was to confirm what she had already known and make the knowing easier to carry. You are an orphan. You have no name that matters. He did not see you. Men like him do not see women like you. She had believed these things her entire life. She had built her life around believing them, had constructed every habit and instinct and defense she owned on the solid foundation of their truth. They had never failed to settle before. They had always fit. They still didn't fit. This terrified her more than the dark did. More than the road or the cold or the absence of any clear destination ahead of her. The words had always been the reliable thing, the fixed point, and if they were no longer fixed then she did not know what was, and she did not have the luxury right now of not knowing. She kept walking. The fortress was gone behind the trees. The sky above the canopy was still fully dark, no suggestion yet of morning, and the road was a slightly lighter shade of black than the forest on either side of it. You are the only thing my wolf has ever stopped for. She pushed that away, kept walking. On the other side of the fortress walls, Josh Klin woke from something that had not really been sleep. A shallow, restless suspension that his body had accepted in place of rest and his wolf had spent the entire night rejecting. He was on his back in the dark of the guest chamber with his eyes open before he understood why, aware only of a wrongness in the air, a specific and directional absence, a silence in the place where something should have been. He was up and dressed in under 2 minutes. Through the corridor in 3. In the courtyard before the 4th, reading the air with the focused attention of a wolf that has been tracking something across distance and has just registered that the distance has increased, that what it was orienting toward is moving, has been moving for some time, is already further than it should be. He did not stop to explain himself to the guard at the stable door. He saddled the horse himself, quickly, with the economic precision of someone who has done it in worse conditions than this, and rode through the gate into the gray beginning of morning before anyone had assembled an opinion about it. The trail was in the air, faint, stretched thin by distance and time, but unmistakable to anything that had been searching for it since the night of the moonlit choosing. He followed it the way other men followed roads, with the absolute confidence of someone who has no doubt about the direction and no patience for doubt even if it arrived. He found her as the sky was beginning to consider gray. She heard the horse before she saw it and stopped walking. She did not turn around immediately. She stood in the middle of the road with her bundle against her chest and her back to the sound of hooves slowing behind her, and something in her went very still in the way things go still when they have already identified what is coming and are deciding how to meet it. He dismounted. She heard his boots on the road, and then the footsteps. Unhurried, that same deliberate pace she had been watching all week, and they stopped 2 feet behind her. She turned around. He looked at her face in the gray pre-dawn light with the direct, unhurried attention he gave everything, and she watched his eyes move over the shadows beneath hers, the bundle, the set of her jaw, and she kept her expression as even as she could manage, which was not as even as she would have liked. You always run, he said. Not an accusation. Something quieter than that. She told him she didn't want him. He said he didn't believe her. She told him to let her go. He said he couldn't. She told him she was nothing to him, and her voice stayed level saying it, which cost her more than she would ever tell anyone. He was quiet for a moment. Then, you are the only thing my wolf has ever stopped for. The road held the silence for longer than was comfortable. He reached out slowly, one hand, rising toward her face with a patience that gave her every opportunity in the world to step back, to turn, to resume the walking that had not been working anyway. His palm cupped her face, warm against the cold of the morning, and she stood in it and did not step back. The kiss was not gentle and not tentative and not any of the things she might have constructed in advance if she had been the kind of person who let herself construct things in advance. It was everything that had been accumulating since the moment his eyes found hers across a dark forest clearing, arriving all at once without apology. She lasted exactly 1 second. Then her hands found his chest, and instead of pushing they pulled, and he made a low sound against her mouth that was partly surprise and entirely, completely, the sound of something inevitable that had finally stopped being patient. When they separated, the sky above the trees had gone from gray to gold. Her Lady Vorn was quiet for a moment. Then she set her glass on the table, rose, and walked to the window, and stood looking out at the courtyard below with her back to him. Her posture was flawless. It always was. "I have spent 2 years building this alliance," she said, to the window, to the courtyard, to the controlled middle distance she was addressing instead of him. "My kingdom's trade routes, my border protections. 2 years of work, of negotiation, of positioning." A pause. "And you would discard it." Another pause, longer. Her voice dropped slightly. "For a girl with no name and no blood and no family to speak of." "Yes," Josh said. The room sat with that for a moment. Then, without turning, without raising her voice, Lady Vorn said, "If that girl disappears, no one will ever prove anything." The room changed. Josh did not move. Nothing about him moved. Not his posture, not his hands, not his expression. But something shifted in the quality of the air around him, a change that had nothing to do with temperature and yet felt exactly like a drop in it. The thing that sat behind the authority and the deliberate calm, the thing that was neither man nor performance, became briefly, completely present. When he spoke, his voice was so low that Lady Vorn's hands, still resting on the window frame, went very slightly still. "If she disappears," he said, "I will take this fortress apart stone by stone. And I will start with the ones you are standing on. Not a threat, a description." The difference was audible. He laid out the consequences without emotion, the way you read figures from a ledger, her negotiating rights with every kingdom allied to Valkrath, removed, effective immediately. 2 border territories transferred to neutral administration under Valkrath's protection, the same protection she had structured the last 5 years of her political life around. His men stationed inside her fortress walls permanently, with a direct line of reporting to him alone. "This is mercy," he said, "because Ellis asked for it. She asked me not to destroy you." He let that sit for exactly 1 beat. "I suggest you remember whose mercy it actually is." He left without waiting for her to turn around. Sarah saw Ellis first from across the courtyard and crossed it at a speed that was technically walking and practically not, and the collision when she arrived nearly took them both sideways into the fountain. Ellis caught her and held on and felt the laugh that came up from somewhere she had forgotten was still there. Nara came behind, smaller, quieter, her eyes already bright in the way they got when she was feeling something she hadn't found words for yet. Ellis pulled her in with the other arm and stood there in the middle of the courtyard holding both of them while the fortress moved around them, and for a moment she let herself have it completely. Then she pulled back and looked at them.
Sera-ce face?
Nara's. The only 2 people in any room she had ever walked into who had always, without negotiation, been glad she was there. "You're coming with me," Ellis said. "Ladies in waiting. Both of you. If you want." Nara's mouth fell open. Sarah hugged her again, harder, which was answer enough. Josh found her in the corridor an hour later. She told him what she had done, the words coming out slightly faster than usual, with the particular energy of someone who has made a unilateral decision and is prepared to defend it. He listened to all of it. When she finished, he looked at her for a moment in the quiet way. He looked at things he had already made up his mind about. "All right," he said. She blinked. Just like that. The corner of his mouth shifted. Not quite a smile, near enough. "I told you that you would have everything you want." His eyes stayed on hers, steady and direct and entirely without reservation. I meant it exactly the way I said it. Ellis looked at him standing in the stone corridor in the morning light and thought about Lady Vaughan's words on the road that still wouldn't fit, and thought about the weight of his hand on her face in the gold dawn, and thought that perhaps the most terrifying thing was not being seen at all. Perhaps it was discovering, after a very long time of believing otherwise, that you had always been worth seeing. The inner chamber of Valcrath was older than the castle built around it. You could feel it in the stone, a density, a patience, the particular quality of walls that had absorbed centuries of ceremony and held the weight of all of it without strain. The candles were low and numerous, their light amber and unsteady, throwing soft shadows across the faces of the elders arranged in their semicircle with the quiet, witnessing expressions of people who understood the gravity of what they were present for and had no need to perform it. Sarah and Nara stood at the back wall. Ellis had looked at them once when she entered. Sarah's face open and unguarded in a way it rarely was, Nara's eyes already bright, and then she had looked forward and kept her eyes there. Josh stood before her in the amber light. The chamber made him look exactly like what he was, something that belonged to old things, to stone and ceremony and the kind of authority that did not require an audience to exist. He looked at her with the same directness he always looked at her with, and asked, quietly, for her alone. "Are you going to run?" The corner of her mouth shifted. "Not this time." The eldest elder began to speak. The language was old, older than the common tongue, older perhaps than the fortress itself, and Ellis understood none of the words and every syllable. They arrived not through her ears but through her bones, a resonance that bypassed comprehension entirely and went somewhere deeper, somewhere below language and above instinct, as though something ancient in the room had been waiting a very long time for a specific sound and was now, finally, hearing it. When the words ended, the chamber was very still. Josh lifted his hand slowly and moved her copper hair away from her shoulder. Not quickly, not efficiently, but with the unhurried attention of a man who knows exactly what he is doing and sees no reason to be hasty about any of it. His fingers traced the curve of her neck, light and deliberate, and the air in her lungs became something she couldn't quite release. His dark eyes found hers one final time, holding the question without asking it again. She nodded. The bite, when it came, was nothing like she had imagined and everything she hadn't known to expect. It was not gentle. It was not quiet. It was the opening of something that had been sealed for so long the seal itself had become invisible. Light pouring into places that had been dark so long she had stopped knowing they were dark, had incorporated the darkness into her understanding of herself as simply the way things were. The wolf's presence flooded through her like a tide that knew where it was going, enormous and ancient and completely, unhesitatingly certain of her, specifically, in a way that made every doubt she had ever held about herself feel suddenly, absurdly small. She felt him, what he was beneath the crown and the authority and the careful, deliberate calm. Something vast and decided and immovable, oriented toward her with the totality of a compass finding north. Her legs gave without warning. She didn't feel herself fall. She felt his arms first, closing around her before she reached the ground, holding her weight with that steady, effortless strength, the solidity of something that had been intending to catch her all along. His voice came from very close, low and certain. "I have you." She let the dark come. She woke to gold light and sounds that were wrong, footsteps in the stone corridor outside the room arriving with a clarity that had no right to exist through walls that thick, crisp and distinct as though some layer between her and the world had been quietly removed while she slept. She lay still for a moment, orienting, and became aware of two things at once. The mark on her shoulder had already healed, the skin smooth and closed in a way that should have taken days, and Josh was in the chair beside the bed with his elbows on his knees and shadows under his eyes that said he had been there all night and had chosen to be there. He looked up when she moved. Neither of them said anything for a moment. The council met that morning. Aldrich, the eldest elder, was on his feet before Josh had fully taken his seat, and his face carried the particular expression of a man who has spent the night recalculating everything and has arrived at a conclusion that changes the shape of what he thought he knew. He spoke carefully. Ellis Ridge was not fully human. The aura she had left in the ritual chamber was not the aura of a human woman. The elders had spent the night analyzing it and were in agreement. She carried dormant shifter blood, wolf heritage buried so deep it had never stirred, never declared itself, never given her or anyone around her any reason to suspect it existed. Her origins remained unknown, her parents untraced. But the evidence of the bond was unambiguous. The speed of her healing, the clarity of the return signal, the mark that had closed overnight. And Josh Klin, Aldrich said, who had walked into this council chamber this morning, was measurably more powerful than the man who had left Ladyvorn's fortress 2 weeks ago. A density of alpha presence the elders had not felt in 3 generations. She completed you, Aldrich said, choosing the word with care, in a way none of us expected. Josh told them to find everything. Her parents, her origins, how she came to Ladyvorn's fortress. Every record that could be located. Aldrich nodded. They had already begun. He found her in the inner garden an hour later. She was sitting on a stone bench in the morning sun with her hands in her lap and her sea-glass eyes fixed on the middle distance. Not vacant, not lost, but the expression of someone holding something too large to process all at once and doing it quietly, without asking for help. The copper of her hair caught the light. The mark was visible at the edge of her dress, already clean and healed, as though it had always been there. He sat beside her without speaking. The garden held them for a moment. A bird somewhere in the old stonework, the sound of the pack going about the ordinary business of mourning beyond the walls. "The counselors told me you became stronger," she said, without looking at him. "Because of you." "Yes. Is that strange?" He looked at her face in the light, at the mark, at the woman who had lost a bet and crept into a forest and changed everything without intending any of it. "No," he said. "It's the only thing that has ever made sense." He took a breath. "I want to tell you something, Ellis." She looked at him. "I don't care about your past. I don't care what blood you carry or what name you grew up under, or what any court in this kingdom has decided you are worth." His eyes stayed on hers, dark and direct and stripped of every layer of performance. "I care about what you are when you stop trying to disappear. The woman who asked for mercy for the person who threatened her. Who wanted her friends beside her before she asked for a single thing for herself. Who stood on a road in the dark with everything she owned in her hands and chose to stay. Pause small and full. That is who I love. More than this kingdom. More than this crown. More than anything I was before you stood in those trees and refused to look away." The garden was very quiet around them. Ellis lifted her hand to his face. She was not in a hurry. She had learned, in the past week, that there was time now, that rushing was a habit born of believing things were temporary, and she was beginning, carefully, to believe that this was not. Her fingers traced the line of his jaw, the coarse dark beard, the corner of his mouth, with the full attention of someone who is no longer looking for the exit. Then she looked at him steadily, with eyes that had stopped searching for the quickest way out of every room. "I love you too," she said. "I think I started to, the moment you stopped walking." The smile that crossed Josh Klin's face was slow and full and completely, entirely unguarded. Nothing managed about it. Nothing held back. The first wholly unconstructed thing she had ever seen from him. It transformed his face the way dawn transforms a landscape. The same features made entirely different by what was moving through them. It was the most devastating thing she had ever seen. She did not look away from a single second of it. "Belle, and that's the end of our story. But tell me honestly, which moment broke you? The road at dawn? The ramparts? You are the only thing my wolf has ever stopped for? Drop it in the comments." Backhand index pointing down, and if you watched this whole story and haven't subscribed yet, you know what to do. Hit the button. Share this with someone who needs a love like this in their life tonight, and I will see you in the next one. Wolf face sparkles.